Hello and welcome to the 2019 CIO virtual event, Too Hard to Handle, How to Clean and Standardize Your Organization's Data. My name is Julia Boyle with Argyle Executive Forum, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to thank Flexera for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Flexera. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleCIO. You can also follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum and be sure to join our LinkedIn group, CIO CISO Forum. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you have received a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support in this policy. We have a sampling of upcoming CIO leadership forums that may be of interest to you. November 6th in Toronto, Ontario, November 14th in LA, and December 5th in Boston. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up during today's event into the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Alejandro Lavi, Director of Strategy at Flexera. We are pleased to have you, Alejandro, with us to deliver opening remarks. Over to you.
Julia, thank you so much, and good afternoon or morning to everyone joining this wonderful webinar. Thanks to Argyle for supporting us and helping us and partnering with us for so many years. And also thanks to all of our esteemed CIOs and executives represented here that are going to be part of a hopefully very lively conversation around data and many complexities and challenges around data in our organizations. I'll introduce the panelists in a few minutes, but as Julia was saying, it's important to have some level setting and ideas on why we're here and why we're discussing these data. And definitely, data can mean many things to you depending on your position and your role in the organization, in the vertical you're in. And when we talk about data in different publications, webinars, podcasts, etc., there's so many angles to it. There's the famous GDPR that was all over the news for the last 2 years or so. There's the ownership, the analytics, ML, AI, bias in data, a very hot topic with social media and elections coming up in 2020, of course. And all of the tools that are available, there's so much to talk about data. But in reality today, we want to focus our conversation in an area where we believe we have an expertise, which is IT asset data. And I've been in the market for 20 some years. I don't want to give up my age too much, but it's funny how this hasn't changed. When I sit down with IT executives, with many people in the room that represent IT, and when we ask, how many assets do you have? How many assets are you covering in this organization, from cloud to on-prem to bring your own device? And I get a single different answer from every person that's sitting on the table. Most times, people don't really know. There's not one single assessment on how many assets. And it gets difficult to manage an environment. It gets difficult to understand where you are, where you're going, what you need to do, what challenges, what changes. If you don't understand what you have, let alone how many. And when you receive the visit of an auditor, both an internal or external for regulatory compliance or just for any reason, vendor audits, for example, what can they expect and how can the outcome of that audit be different if we don't really have the basic information available to our organization? And the reality is that it is hard, and we haven't solved that problem in the industry in general because it is hard. We have so many contributors to the complexity of that data, and we have so many different environments and architectures and stakeholders that need that data. So it ends up being an entanglement of information, data scattered all over the organization, and the larger it is, the more complex it is. But in reality, all of that entanglement is something that many stakeholders across the organization need, from finance to software asset managers, operations, security, CISOs, CIO, CFOs. Everybody needs a piece of that data. We need to understand where those assets are for regulatory compliance. We need to understand what data do they hold, what database are they running because they want to do a migration. I want to understand the heat exchange requirements of the servers and different hardware so that I can design my next data center or move to a cloud data center. And all of these stakeholders need that data because they have to do both things at the same time. In IT, we are known for having to manage too many things, which include sustaining the current state of business, keeping the lights on, and then help the organization compete through innovation, being able to create a differentiation in the market. And IT is no longer a service department as it was in the 90s to the business. IT right now is the differentiation for many businesses. And as you heard before said many times, every business is a technology business these days. So ideally, we want to reach a point where all of these stakeholders have access to data that is normalized. Doesn't matter which sources of that data you have, it's normalized and everybody has access to that same common language that is also enriched with maybe hard to obtain data and shared across all of the stakeholders. So when they all sit at the table, they all not only share the same and accurate number of devices that they have, as I was referencing to the question that I usually ask, but they also understand all of the facets of that data so that the business can move forward. And this is what removing those data silos, this is when it becomes difficult to have vetted, validated, cleaned, and enriched data that is common to all different functions that also feed all sorts of initiatives that the CIO or CEO have. So what we want to talk today about is, after Flexera's research and all of the talk to our customers and through our solutions, etc., we've identified a few commonalities of what leaders in the industry are doing and are managing, not only through technology, but also processes and people and organization and culture to try to untangle that technology tangle. And one of the first things that come up in almost every discussion is how to organize large and vast amounts of IT asset data. Because, as you know, Peter Drucker, you can't manage what you can't measure. I would say you can't see. And many problems that come up with larger complex organizations is that there's no access to a lot of these devices that might be disconnected, might be compartmentalized, et cetera, et cetera. So seeing, accessing allows us to determine who needs what data. And this gap analysis, that's this understanding of what that data is for and who needs what, for what reasons, is one of the first elements of success of those that have been able to untangle that tangle. It's determining the stakeholders, determining the use case or the kinds of data, and analyzing which elements of this data are used for what purposes. So we call it a gap analysis on discover environments, finding out those data points and the sources. For example, we see a lot of organizations using System Center from Microsoft or ServiceNow or Qualys, and they all serve the purpose of being the single source of truth for each of their own stakeholders, but in reality, they're not talking to each other. Therefore, everybody calls or knows a different, faster version of the data. Then when we have a gap analysis and understand which environments we need to find out, which data points we want and need for which stakeholders, and what sources are relevant, we rationalize discovery solutions, considering use cases. And this point is important. Many times when we consult with customers, they end up analyzing or finding multiple different sources of information, sometimes even over 12. And through rationalization, by understanding what is needed and what's the objective, they save money by decommissioning or turning off a few of those discovery solutions and standardizing in a smaller subset. It never gets to just one. In our experience, there's a lot of rationalization to 4 or 5 different sources because of the nature of those sources of discovery. Maybe you have discovery sources for the cloud that don't do a good job on-prem or on your data center. Maybe you find sources that are looking for more security aspects of the data, other ones are more operation. So rationalizing them to 3 or 4, it's typically a good outcome. And of course, depends on the complexity and size of the organization. And then the third step would be consolidate into a form of data lake of sorts to find that single source of truth that merges all of those data sources into one that then can be used and improved. And one way of improving it, that single source of data, is filtering out the noise. Turns out that when we look at IT asset data particularly, there's a lot of complexity out there. Vendors that for the same product have up to 10 different variations, data that is not accurate because there's a mistake in how they obtain the data, or even irrelevant information, which is a very hot topic, given that most of the IT tools that we see as discovery tools capture a lot of very irrelevant data for decision making. It might be interesting to know the firmware of a device, or the driver, or if it's a game or a health file, types of assets that some people might find interesting, but for most IT meaningful decisions, the relevant data is around 5% of what is discovered in real life. And that's based on a very large scale of data that we have in our recent surveys. So to cancel some of the noise, to eliminate of the noise, just as a Bose QC35 headset would do when you're flying an airplane, you put them up, you cancel the noise, you eliminate everything that's not needed. The same gap analysis that you did at the beginning drives focus on exactly what you need and what kinds of data you use. Then extracting and prioritizing based on use cases and stakeholders, the graph that I showed you before, is important so that you know and filter out the things that are not important. And configuring and optimizing those discovery sources. In the last 2 or 3 engagements that we've had with large customers, by configuring the sources of inventory that they had, we could minimize by 75%, give or take, the size of the data sets that they were collecting, which of course optimized for network, storage, cost, efficiency, etc. And a lot of this is not just about not collecting data to collect less, it's about collecting the right sets of data through configuration. After the noise has been cleared, okay, you have a clean set of data, but it turns out that every single tool that every stakeholder has different characteristics on how they collect and name information. So you might have a source of data that found Microsoft Outlook in a computer, and another set of data might found MSFT Outlook version 16. Turns out they're the same product, same computer, but it's not the same. It's put out there as not the same. So regardless of the collection method that you have, you need a common data language. So it doesn't matter how many different versions or names or characteristics you pull. If it's the same asset, the same software, the same hardware, you call it the same way through all of the stakeholders for all of the different initiatives that you can see here at the top and many more. We call it the common data language. And to normalize into a common data language, it's important to count with kind of like an encyclopedia, all right? So if one source of data reads Microsoft Outlook V16 3.5, then you go to encyclopedia and say, okay, what's the common name in which we should know this thing and call this type of product? And then regardless of all the other names, just like thesaurus, the adjectives or the synonyms, you should call it one way. And you cannot achieve that if you don't have a set of standards like an encyclopedia. And that encyclopedia needs processing, heuristics, AI, human curation, all sorts of methods to keep it consistently and frequently updated and up to date, because as you know, there's so many versions and patches of software and hardware and models that are put out there every day by the software vendors that are in your organizations. And after you've done that, you return it in an open format to be used across all of the different stakeholders and workflows. And one of the elements of high costs that our customers share with us is how difficult and time-consuming and expensive it is to obtain market data to answer some of the questions that are not available upon discovery of those sources. So, are applications vulnerable? Are applications end of life? Incompatibilities, thermal load of servers. These are things that are typically found through extensive Google searches and to your vendors, et cetera, that are associated to those normalized assets that you find. At the end, the market data with a common data language powered by an encyclopedia kind of standardized data catalog is what fuels a great use of clean, always available, shared data. So in conclusion, the customers that we know have managed and untangled that tangle of IT asset data have great benefits, saving time and people and money, and being more effective at responding to audits, for example, because they have an understanding of what data they have to work with and drive business results. So I want to leave this open for you guys to evaluate, but these are basically the things and recommendations that we have found through our interactions with customers. And again, this is IT asset data, one of the elements of data that you all should or are concerned with, because otherwise you wouldn't be in this webinar. And because it's just one of these elements, part of the intention of having our panelists here is to drill a little deeper either these or other types of concerns that they have in their daily lives. So for that, I'm going to open up the panel discussion, and I'm going to introduce to you these fine people that I will ask for them please to introduce themselves with name and their roles in the organizations, and we'll start with the panel. And for our audience, if you want to submit a question for this panel, please use the function of the Q&A here in the interface, and we'll have at the end a few minutes to moderate and answer some of those questions, hopefully. So I guess ladies first. Kamalika, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Kamalika Sandel. I'm the Deputy CIO at American University, and as part of that, I get to look at enterprise applications, project operations, and data is a significant part. Externally on the analytics aspect, every organization, not just higher ed, we lead in with data. Where is the competitive advantage? And the second part that always puts the emphasis on internal data is how fast can we impact change, and what are we not going to mess up in the process? And Alejandro, that's a lot of what you talked about.
Yeah, thank you, Kamalika. Thank you. I look forward to a couple of things that I wanted to ask you for your
Sounds good.
feedback.
Thank you.
I guess let's do it in alphabetical order. Arthur, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Arthur Ream. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer and Senior Director of Applications at Cambridge Health Alliance, free hospital system, multiple clinics in the Cambridge-Boston area. We're this Cambridge Public Health Commission, so we are a quasi-public entity. So we've got the health department for the city of Cambridge and all of the school systems and elderly housing as well. So we're an acute care hospital system, and we have a large behavioral health population that we serve, and are one of the state's safety net hospitals to take care of their indigent care population. My overview is obviously the security officer, but I also have the application portfolio and the 2 EHRs we have at Cambridge.
Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate it. Gustav, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, this is Gustav Schrills. I'm the CIO for White Lodging. We're a large hotel franchise developer, owner, and management company. We are very much a data-driven organization, and I'm responsible for all aspects of technology, here at White Lodging.
Thank you, Gustav. And last but certainly not least, Jeff.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Myers. I am a director within State Farm's Enterprise Director and Data and Analytics Group. I oversee more on the analytics side, particularly our data science and AI teams.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And Alejandro Lavi, that's me. I'm the Director of Strategy at Flexera. I've been in the industry for 20-some years in different capacities, advising and consulting and business development. Been in around 4 countries, lived in 4 different countries. That's why my accent is so thick. So I hope that you guys can still understand me. So I want to open the panel with one question, one quick question to go around the table, hopefully to kick things forward. Data. What's the first word that comes to your mind when I say data, when you hear data? Jeff? One word.
Mess.
What was that again?
Mess. M-E-S-S.
Okay. Arthur?
Challenges.
All right. Kamalika?
Fuel.
All right. Gustav?
Acquisition.
Acquisition?
Yeah.
Okay, now I got to drill deeper into that. What do you mean by acquisition of data? Why is that the first word of choice for data?
Acquisition is the different methods in which you acquire the data. And clearly, the reality is in our industry, a lot of the data comes internal, but a lot of the data comes from the brands and from third-party, research companies. So acquiring the data is by far one of the, most important components of our data strategy.
Okay, so now, Gustav, acquiring the data is one of the most important components. What is the biggest challenge that you guys have at White Lodging when it comes to data management?
Well, I think you addressed it in your presentation a little bit, but the way we like to think about data is data without putting context to it, is nothing more than just data. So, we tend to concentrate on the fact that, data with the proper context and correlation becomes information, and information, again, with the proper context and correlation and rationalization becomes knowledge, and based on the knowledge, if you have a history of knowledge, you can, do pretty accurate prediction. And so we think of data in those, 4 phases: data, information, knowledge, and prediction.
Okay, so context, enrichment of data. You mentioned also the sourcing from internal sources, from external sources, kind of what we were talking about before, right? You need some enrichment to make sure that the data you're generating tells the right story.
Absolutely.
Kamalika, one of the things that probably you are also working with is that. It's how do you tell the right story from the data that you gather?
Right. Yeah, and that's an opportunity in itself, which is my choice of word. Data can be the fuel that fuels our businesses, but it's also a challenge because data without context is tricky. If we look into the business of academia for us, we enroll students. We find individuals who can be students at the university, and then we get them through the process, whether it's 4 years, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it might be, or whether they might be a lifelong learner, and then hope we've done a great job with them so they become engaged with the university and become engaged alumni and fundraisers. The whole process is fueled by data. And then there is, as Gustav was kind of saying, there is external data, which is who are the right prospects that we want to market our course content to, because the cost of marketing is very high. It's not a one-size-fits-all, so we can't put the same level of marketing efforts towards all things. It has to be differentiated. How do we get this differentiation in place? Well, with data. So in order for us to put data as insights into the right people's hands at the right points of time, the context of data becomes incredibly important. Also, something as basic but also incredibly complex, which is the topic of data governance. What data is being used for what purposes, with what weightage, and who gets to make that call? Some of these are macro, high-level decisions, and some of these are very micro, just-in-time decisions. So when you take that and look into the pace at which universities have to change today so they're not stuck in one model, that's when, the topic of data governance, we can't look at something for a month to make a decision. We have to make that decision just in time. So the structure of a people structure needs to be in place. The roles needs to be in place, whether it's chief data officer or individuals who have the right to make the decision about data at the right time. But also the tools need to be organized. The information needs to be presented in a manner so that the impact of making those decisions is clear at any given time. So orchestrating all of this and having infrastructure and tools to support this process is probably the biggest challenge for us now.
So how do you make sure that the story that data is telling you, Kamalika, is the right story? Because yes, the tools, the processes, access, the right decisions, fast decisions, driving differentiation, your population is, the population data becomes very useful for decision making. But how do you make sure that whoever is presenting or owning that data is getting to the right conclusions?
And that's part of it is a skill set, but it's an analyst skill set, but it's an analyst per excellence at a very high level who understands the business model of the university and understands the implication of data in the context of that business model. If I have more enrollment in one particular discipline that is more than last year, it's as per budget. That still might not be good enough if the individual didn't know the relative priority of that discipline or that field as you compare it to other fields. So understanding the business context and then being able to translate it into meaningful data context and work with people who have analyst skill set, that's the part of, that's the telling of the story, because data points are just data points. You can stitch them in any order, and numerous stories can be made with that. The story that makes sense is the story that relates to the priorities of our organization, which is our university, and what aligns with whatever it is we're trying to do. So, for example, we're trying to create new models that will attract lifelong learners to the university. That's not the same objective as increasing research. That's also not the same objective as increasing our on-premise undergraduate enrollment. So at the highest level, are we clear what is it that we're trying to uniquely drive and what is it that sets us apart at this point of time that gives us differentiated value? And then those data points need to be aligned with that objective, and the story needs to be told in lines with that priority, if you will. So it's a skill set gap
like
too at campus that you're trying to find someone who can do that crosswalk between business context and data context and do it pretty easily, and then work with a lot of detailed people at all the levels to consume that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that sounds very close to something that I'm very passionate about, which is strategy. If the elements of the organization that are analyzing the data are not aligned with the strategy and what we're trying to achieve, then it might get a lot more complicated to move forward on your objectives. Now, when you mention analysis of the data and telling a story from the data, I got to bring in Jeff. Jeff, you are specialized in analytics, and data is your thing. You're probably a data scientist at heart, if not in day-to-day job. But Jeff, how do you see this? And also weaving in, please, in State Farm, being a company that's loved and seen around the world, what challenges do you see in data when you consider globalization in different markets?
Sure. So given that my one word was mess, or maybe messy to be more descriptive, but so State Farm, and my experience was in a lot of enterprises, have the data has been siloed. The ownership has been by individual product areas, and now the idea of bringing it together as an enterprise asset has been the biggest challenge. So, in our long history, the idea of using these resources for the individual areas, there's a lot of success and experience, but the idea of cross uses, of leveraging different areas data, that's been the challenge. That's where we're looking to expand and grow. But, in terms of the story and how do we try to overcome all that is obviously the business acumen is important, but these areas, if you're working across different silos, you're not going to know everything. So the documentation, the metadata, the history, the lineage, all of this is key, let alone just having standards of conformance. It's a lot. It's messy.
One element that you and I discussed the other day was on bias, the bias that you can see in data. What can you tell us about that and how that is managed at State Farm, and what do you think about it?
Sure. Yeah, so not a super popular view, but that data is the data generating process is, and this is rather philosophical, is society, is us. And given the society we live in which there are biases, the world is not fair, then the data itself contains these biases, the difficulties of fairness. And yet in a highly regulated industry, it is important to address these concerns and to face them head on. So the idea that there isn't going to be bias in the data is essentially putting your head in the sand, and it becomes more about addressing these issues, transparency, and accounting for them when you're using them in an analytic fashion. And of course, again, being in the insurance and financial service industry, I would face a lot of regulatory requirements that do so. But even if you aren't in that, to believe that your data is collected in an unbiased manner is ignoring the actual underlying process. I would say that in terms of how do we address it, there's a lot of mathematical techniques, but we are not the only ones, but a popular method of having multiple eyes, different viewpoints, looking at the work is been proven to be the best form of addressing biases in the data and even the way the data is used. I'd love to say there's a perfect way. I'd love to say there's something that can be thoroughly automated, but in general, it is requiring very much a human element and diversity of thought to address these biases.
Especially when you think about ML and AI and how we are educating the machines to take decisions and have descriptive models, right? The more variety you have in the input, the more likely it is to have a varied output, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And folks, generally classify the bias as in the data you choose to use, but it's not just the data you choose to use, it's how that data was formed. So understanding the source, the master lineage is absolutely key.
Right. Arthur, I want to bring you in the conversation because you're also in a highly regulated industry, right? How do you see in the new world of regulations with GDPR, which I don't know if you are too worried about, the California regulations, how do you see your role as a CISO with having to take care of now not just what's good for the business and what's right for the customers and your constituents, how you do and balance the regulatory compliance when it comes to data?
Yeah, I mean, in the healthcare industry, we see a broad range of data, both, from the insurers. So you've got the claims data that's coming back in. We've got the inherent data that we produce in treating and taking care of patients across the board in our EHRs. And all that quantifiable data is used to take care of people and, make them better. So, data analytics and data review and population health all meld in together with multiple data sets, those which we generate here, those which are generated in paying claims, so that we can see if we're measured in our community and our community health is improving, which all relate to reimbursement. So guarding that data from a CISO's perspective is kind of a double-edged sword. It's always about, and this is, kind of cliche, about measuring risk. I weigh risk every day. Data needs to move, and that data needs to be shared with community partners and, from here to across the country. We interconnect with, almost 1.5 million records every month is exchanged on people that show up in EDs on the West Coast that are our patients so that they get treated in a continuum of care. So protecting that in transit in their systems, we're highly reliant on each other, but we're highly reliant on transferring that data. So protecting the data sets that move around from various organizations with significantly different levels of IT infrastructure is always a concern with me. And it's always a risk. I mean, healthcare in itself, that data right there is a gold mine for most entities at this point. And, healthcare, like a lot of other companies, we cross multiple data sets. It's not only a healthcare data set, we have the payment data set. We have the PCI regulations for the payment card industry. We're moving cash around all over the place as well, just like the other places. We're interacting with the insurance and the payers every day, ingesting and sending claims out. So it's a constant ebb and flow. And then if you get into certain areas like we have the research data for some of our researchers. At the same time, they want everything open, they want everything locked down. It's kind of a dichotomy that makes it kind of tough to keep track of everything. So part of that is data classification and weighing the risk. What are the chances that this is going to get compromised? And you need to think through those. And I think you can't do that singly. You have to do that from largely a committee-based approach with legal, compliance, privacy, and a strong governance group that sits there and just thinks about this. It's about doing your due diligence to protect that.
So is it really just doing your due diligence? Because you as a CISO, and let me ask you a different question. Do you have a chief data officer, or is that a role that resides on your shoulders?
So the chief data officer ultimately resides on, I would say, in this institution, it resides on 3 people.
Yeah.
It resides on me for the protection. It resides on the chief privacy officer for privacy and regulatory concerns there. And it arises to the level of the chief compliance officer for compliance regulations with insurance companies and stuff like that, and who should and shouldn't see the data. And then finally, an oversight, less of a weighty input is primarily corporate legal. So, I mean, there's 4 entities that actually, at this institution, look at data, pay attention to data, classify it, and allow it to move or do what it needs to do, or the people that need it get it in the appropriate format and form.
I want to go quick around the table to validate how that is also implemented in the different organizations represented here. Kamalika, in American University, do you have a chief data officer, or is it a model much like what Arthur described for Cambridge Health?
It's similar to the model that Arthur describes. There is a recognition that there needs to be accountability through the equivalent of a chief data officer, but the university does not have someone who has that title. So it's very similar to what Arthur was saying. You've got IT, and with the information security, you've got our compliance office, and you've got data privacy, and those elements come together. That's when I talk about data governance, that's also a large part of data governance. You know, in a sense, what that group is deciding is what is the purpose of this data? What can and should it be repurposed to use for? And what are the opportunities when we do that? What are the risks when we do that? And what are straight out no's, you know, that we can't do that? We are balancing the research data needs and the need for researchers to have the openness in an environment. And then there are privacy issues, which we don't even have to go to GDPR, but on a campus, student data is owned by students. And even for the sake of helping students, where can we use that data, where should we not? And the clear lines of do's and don'ts are okay. Most of us, we've lived in this world long enough to probably understand that. The harder questions are, where are you increasing the risk? So by keeping admissions data and data on all prospects that they're not even coming to the university, they never joined as students, how soon can I get rid of the data? What's the opportunity cost if I got rid of the data too soon in terms of not being able to mine the data for insights about that student base? Where did we get the students? Where did we not get the students? So there is an opportunity cost if I get rid of the data too fast. But there is also a risk if I keep that data too long. So that's the group that comes together to assess all this in a collaborative sort of federated fashion is security, it's privacy, and it's a couple of our business heads who look at the opportunity that is presented with data. So we don't have a CDO role.
So multiple groups that report to different areas and have different capabilities and responsibilities.
Right.
Same
they come together, and there's probably 4 entities. It's coordinated through the IT office. So we play the lead facilitation role, if you will, but it's reported out through the president's office and cabinet as decisions that impact.
Did you say that they all report to the CIO office?
No, these people report to different parts of the organization. So compliance
different parts. Okay, got it.
Risk, yes. So it's a very federated model. Responsibilities are clarified through a charter, and then the group works together to make decisions and reports out.
Got it. And Gustav, how is it in White Lodging?
So in White Lodging, the chief data officer is also the chief information security officer. So we combine the roles. It is a matrix responsibility. Ultimately, the responsibility sits with that person, but we do have what we call a data governance committee that meets every week with multiple functional owners represented, and we talk about all data-related issues or opportunities that fall into each of the categories of data. So we do classify data in the common classifications like what is public, what is internal only, what is confidential, what is restricted, and then apply the proper retention policy based on the different classifications. And I imagine many of the companies represented here, there are exceptions when we have, for example, contracts that are 20-year in length. So even though we have a 7-year retention policy, the 20-year-old contract can be, deleted. And so, so there are, obviously exceptions that are being worked. But essentially the data governance committee, with representation of all the functional areas is how we manage all data-related activities, with ultimately, the CISO being responsible for the data.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Gustav. So there's a little bit of everything in how these companies manage it. Jeff, how do you guys do it in State Farm? CDO or multiple people responsible?
Sure. We actually have a role, Chief Data and Analytics Officer. So we have the CDO, and we've also combined it with the analytics function. My vice president oversees the data governance functions, the collection of data and access, as well as then the way that advanced analytics and business intelligence are conducted at State Farm. The idea is that they are paired together. Like other panelists have talked about, the role, of course, does have a matrixed aspect to it, in that it connects through the CIO and our Chief Digital Officer as well. So there's a lot of handshakes that go along with it, but the idea that data is largely meant to be used for advanced analytic purposes, particularly at an insurance company, was why we combined the roles.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Jeff. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I want to go around the table and ask specifically about IT asset as a data set. We could spend here probably 3 or 4 more hours talking about all of these things, and I think I'm going to leave a few questions that I have prepared originally off the table because of time. I think this conversation has been going great, but again, one of the elements of data that have proven to be difficult to manage is the IT asset data. So I would like to go around the table and ask, what do you see as the main problem with getting clean, normalized, and rich and shared IT asset data across your stakeholders in your organization? And how do you think we should solve it? Let's start with Gustav, please.
Yeah, so, IT asset data, is, something that the biggest issue with IT asset data is the quantity of it. And to earlier points made by several people is, what is relevant and what is not relevant. And, so, for example, in the security area, we do a lot of analysis of everything from how files are modified to how files are actually moving in the organization, whether or not there's a traffic pattern analysis performed, and whether or not the traffic is something that is expected or not expected, etc. So it gets very complicated and very burdensome in terms of quantity of data. And so we do have, before we collect the data, we actually have a appliance that essentially eliminate the noise and reduce based on algorithms, the false positives and negatives, and provide us, a more clean and relevant amount of data that we can manage our IT assets with. So that's, at a very high level, how we look at IT asset data.
Thank you, Gustav. So there's a little bit of cleanup at the source. There's the understanding from multiple different sources. Quick question for you, Gustav. Do you have many stakeholders around the organization that could benefit from cleaner, better data, or do you think this is mostly a function of the CIO?
So there is no question that, like most organizations, there is more demand on whoever is in charge of data than they generally have capacity to fulfill that demand. And so, so your point is very well taken. There is more requests to get either more data, cleaner data, more relevant data, creating more context between data, and that always exceeds the capacity that one has. So it's a constant prioritization on what is most relevant and provides the best return to the business, and so it's a constant prioritization effort. Looking at what you spend your available resources on.
Are you saying that we are overworked in this industry and we're being asked to do more with less? I don't believe you. Arthur, what's your point on IT asset data? What do you see are the biggest challenges? Arthur, are you on mute? Okay, well Arthur comes off mute.
I apologize for that.
Oh, there you go, yes. Go ahead.
So I think largely across, healthcare, it's similar to other institutions or other verticals. We have so much data in multiple places and a lot of access to it, and everybody wants to do their own analysis on it. So, tracking or keeping track of, downloaded data sets that, the fiscal department, they always want to manipulate it in Excel versus in the, in the EHRs or the tools, even though they have the dashboards, they want to do other manipulation of it outside of the data analytics group, which we have here, which would provide the reports, but there's a certain level of independence there. So keeping track of it, providing them a central place to put things that is secure, and tracking that asset and making sure it doesn't have any egress out by accident or otherwise is always a significant challenge. And then making sure that subset of the that data, the master data set, there's always these subsets that get created and moved around, is keeping track of that and or retiring them or destroying them as needed over the course of time. And I think that's one of my largest challenges here, is keeping track of all that moving data.
Moving data it is from the on-prem to cloud and back and forth. Actually, before I continue with Kamalika and Jeff's positions on it, let me do a really quick hot chair kind of question. And I wanna hear a yes or no from each of you, please, if you humor me. Should your organization's most important data live in the cloud? Yes or no, Jeff?
Yes.
Arthur?
Yes.
Kamalika?
Yes.
Gustav? I'll take that as a yes because we can't hear you. You're on mute. Excellent to see you, because indeed our own report of what our CIOs are doing and spend in organizations is going, is that the spend on cloud technologies is going through the roof, while on-premises technology is reduced, of course, and we kind of all know that. But the other elements of our report surfacing is the amount of data that used to be considered sensitive and crucial for the business to survive that is being transferred to the cloud. And I invite you to go to flexera.com and find that report because it's really fascinating. Going back to the first question, Jeff, IT asset data, what's the biggest pain problems and how we solve it in State Farm?
I think my answer is going to mirror Gustav's quite a bit. So volume for income side key asset data and sorting out what is noise and what is useful, particularly for the insurance industry when it comes to telematics and so the devices that are being used in the automobiles, the frequency, the speed, all of it that's coming in. And as far as how to resolve it, the only part that I can answer really with any certainty is that it's going to have to revolve around a cloud structure, just due to the size and speed of which it's coming in. It is overwhelming.
Do you mean the data coming from the cloud, or the data that? I guess I would like more understanding of that.
Yeah. So the telematics devices that record how folks are driving, braking, accelerating, taking corners tightly, incidents such as auto accidents, all of that, and the frequency at which it's coming in is astronomical. The size of this data is just immense, and that without a cloud infrastructure in place, there's just no way that we can get our arms wrapped around it, let alone start to analyze it. So for us, it is truly a volume issue when it comes to IT assets. But lumping in the telematics devices into that, and then trying to sort through it. So the ability to sort through it in of itself is challenging, but it is simply because there's so much of it, and that we have not gotten to the point where we have a solid grasp. There's a lot of lift and use that we got out of it, but there's still so much more. And there's just, while we're trying to figure out exactly how we're going to work with that, the only thing I can say with certainty is it's going to require the cloud infrastructure to solve the problem. There's just no way we can handle it on-prem.
And I guess that's if you consider IoT and the devices that you mentioned, right? But if you go back to basics and just try to understand your on-premises, your data center, your laptops, desktops, etc., that is also a challenge in itself.
Oh, of course. Sorry, I'm lumping IoT into it.
No, it's okay because we turn our attention to the squeaky wheel, and right now IoT, I hear it everywhere, especially in businesses in the financial sector, where it is a major topic. And what I hear from CIOs all the time is that, hey, we haven't even figured out still the data center, and now we have to turn our attention into this IoT thing that's producing massive amounts of data. And as you say, right, only through the cloud you can solve that complexity.
Yes, sir.
So, Kamalika, same question for you, and we only have a couple more minutes before we open the Q&A for the esteemed audience that has joined us. Kamalika, from an IT asset management, as a university, you have a broad aspect of bring your own device, and managing those devices brings its own set of challenges. But for your data center and your bring your own device and your staff and faculty, what do you think is the biggest problem when it comes for your decision making in terms of IT asset management?
So I think some of it is has been shared already, but if I were to think about it like this, I go back to we in higher ed, we are being pushed to do more at a much faster pace than what higher ed had needed to do before, and it is because of the competition. I used to work in Capital One, and we had numerous tests that we would do with credit cards to see which one stuck, which one got us the biggest margin. And so the pace here is not necessarily like that, but we're still needing to pilot different models that are different from our traditional models. So what happens when you have to manage that pace of change is we in IT, we need a very, very good categorization of our IT assets to know what happens if I change something at some level, and that world has become much more complex. There is things in the cloud. There research data systems are, a lot of it is in my data center, a lot of it is not in my data center. So the ecosystem of technology has become much broad, and then you put it, you kind of put the pace of change alongside that, and unless we do a pretty solid job of keeping up with the IT assets and the inventory and the basic cataloging, it's not possible to do this in a manual way and tag things and then get groups together to vet and certify that all the right things are in the place. We need much more. We need to leverage automation much more. We need to, you talked about the multiple discovery methods and standardizing and creating the IT asset catalog that can be looked up when we need to at the right points of time. But the level of automation needs to increase, and there are great tools out there. How we adopt that, that's kind of what we're in the middle of. So that, I would say, is our challenge, even without the massive influx of IoT.
Thank you so much, Kamalika. And I want to close this section before we go into the Q&A with a very quick question, yes or no. In the industry, we know we have many processes. One of them is ancient as my experience in the industry, like IT service management, the management of change and configuration that Kamalika was referencing, which is fundamental into the CMDB, or the CMDB configuration management database, as one element of success for a proper ITSM process. So my quick question for all of you is a yes or no, please. Is the quality of the data in the CMDB a problem in the industry? Again, is the quality of the data in the CMDB a problem in the industry? Jeff?
No.
Okay. Arthur?
I would agree, no.
Kamalika?
Largely no. I think we've figured that out.
Okay. Gustav?
I actually would say yes.
Well, I got to say that, Gustav, you're the only one that matches the results of our survey that we did a few months ago, where 85% of the industry professionals say that CMDB data quality is a problem, mostly for ITSM processes, when you're trying to use CMDB as the main single source of truth for asset management. But again, hey, it's a survey, and I love to see different perspectives and opinions of you all from where you all sit. This is a great conversation. I hope we met the expectations of the crowd and the audience and of your panelists here. I want to thank you all for your time and for being here. And I'm going to open up for questions. Emily, you want to run the questions?
Hi, this is Julia. So I just want to say thank you to our awesome panelists and to you, Alejandro, for doing a great job moderating. So we're going to go into the Q&A portion now. I've reviewed some questions that were submitted by the audience during our discussion. So the first one that was submitted is, do any of you have experience with using NLP or ML for data cleaning and standardization? What is your experience?
So this is Jeff Myers. I can comment that we have used it generally to, in particular, to identify sensitive personal information or and similar things. So using it to identify things like driver's licenses and Social Security and such, that has worked out well. When it comes to identifying names of individuals, it starts to get trickier because of the freedom of which people choose to name themselves or their children and such. Probably the biggest challenge that comes in all of it, though, is just the different formats of which the data itself can be stored. And so it's great for having if you're looking through free-form text, but if you're also trying to have it look into, say, images of driver's licenses, in our case, adding capabilities of OCR, just along the lines, it just gets more and more complex. It was not impossible. It actually it helped quite a bit, and it also helped to, if it couldn't eliminate the data or reduce it, it at least raised flags of where areas required humanized. This is particularly important when we started going through kind of our common shared drive of where all sorts of fun things were being placed without any real monitoring and having been done for years, just at digging through it required that response.
Great, thank you. Do any of our panelists have anything to add?
Yeah, it's Argyle. I would say I actually concur with the statement when it comes to around date of birth, Social Security, those type of, we run into a large cohort of common names that, we could have, 15 people with the same name, and the only differentiating factor would be that date of birth, believe it or not. So in healthcare, used limited in fashion.
Great, thank you guys. So we probably have time for just one more. So what are your predictions for the future of data standardization?
So I guess this is Art. I can take this. Just my scope is obviously healthcare, and then the payers and the payer data that comes into us. Largely, we'd like to think that it's standardized, but we see variations on that on a regular basis, particularly claims data and those type of data sets that come in. We try to standardize on communication language in between intersystems and common language for prescriptions and diagnosis codes and things like that. In those data sets, I think there's a reasonable standardization across the board in that. There's always going to be challenges. I don't think we can classify or standardize everything. Therefore, that's why people in interface engines and exchanges and analytics, have jobs to map that stuff out when we run into those barriers.
Yeah. This is Kamalika. I would agree with that. In the field of, if you think about research, peer-published journals and that kind of data, there's a level of standardization on that already exists and has improved over the last few years. So we have data ingestion engines that can read that directly out of publicly available information and get that, which is good. But there are a lot more data sets where there is effort going on to standardize, but when we ingest those data sets, we absolutely invest in cleaning them up and getting them to make sense for what we need. So in terms of prediction, I expect it's going to get better. I don't see us getting out of the business of investing resources on that anytime soon. I look to the next 18 months, I still have to continue investing the effort and resources to standardize.
So this is
Alejandro. I want to provide an answer. Oh, no, go ahead, Gustav, please. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, just quickly say that I believe that standardization is going to get worse in terms of everybody trying to compete with one another and trying to get their system to be, the icon of, in terms of, data collection and the reporting. So I think that, for typical businesses, it's going to get worse. I think what is really important to understand is that, poor data standardization will result in incomplete and inaccurate, data collection, matching issues and essentially, creates, wrong information from the data. So I think it's very important that, we continue to invest in making sure that for each individual business, the data is standardized, but within your, world and potentially your industry. But, I think we're very far away from having a standardized, data, catalog, that everybody reporting will actually comply with.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gustav. I think addition when it comes to the IT asset data, there's many different quote-unquote standards. There's from the UN. There's the U.S. government has some sort of a standard. At the end, the strongest will prevail. That catalog that I referenced in the beginning, the one that is the most complete, the strongest, the best, the most accurate, will be the one that prevails. But it will never be a standard for the whole world to follow. It's just too hard and too much of a complex beast. Just as it happened with NVD and all of the relevant vulnerability databases around the world. There's a few standards, yes, but it all comes down to who uses it and why.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank you again for joining us today for this fantastic virtual event. Alejandro and all the panelists, thank you for your insightful opinions and views, and I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.